In this episode today, we are going over Man of Steel. My friend Steven Faletti and I are going over three super lessons in writing that we can get from this movie, Man of Steel, that came out in 2013. But first, go into the description and click on the link there for a free ebook. It'll download right to you. It's an epic fantasy ebook. And also like and follow and share and all of that fun stuff. So let's get to it. Well, welcome back to Great Stories Change the World. This is the YouTube channel where a science fiction fantasy author, that's me, and today I have a special guest with me, Steven Faletti, also a fantasy science fiction author.
That's me.
That's right. We're going over movies, books, those sort of things, and talk about what makes good writing. How do we tell great stories, or maybe how people do it wrong at times? And we review things like books and movies and TV shows so that we can learn how to tell better stories, because I do believe that great stories change the world. So today I have with me an old friend, and he's a first time on the YouTube channel, but Steven and I used to have a podcast together called Brew and Ink, and we've been talking about kind of jumping back on some projects together. And I said, why don't you just come on and do some of these deconstructing the stories with me on some of these movies? So, Steven, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on the show. This is exactly the kind of stuff I like to do. We like to get together, chat about good stories, good characters, break down what makes good writing work and what makes bad writing not work. And so this is when you said, hey, I'm reviewing some movies and I'm thinking about doing Man of Steel. I was on board for that because I hadn't seen it. Wow, I probably since like DVD release 2014. So it was good to go back and watch it. Not to get too far into this rabbit trail, but DC had a really good start with this movie, and the whole DC verse. I had high hopes for it with this movie when it came out, because I felt like it hit a lot of those good storytelling beats. So I'm excited to talk about it with you guys and discuss it with you on this channel.
Yeah, so yeah, Man of Steel, for those of you who may or may not know, it was directed by Zack Snyder,
Snyder.
right? And this was kind of his first foray into the DC universe. And the DC universe had some success with Batman Begins, basically. So Batman
Mhm.
Begins and Christopher Nolan, and they had really kind of set the stage for this. And so they were like, well, let's get into
Superman
more.
story.
Let's get
Yeah.
into Superman and Wonder Woman. Let's get into some of these movies. And Wonder Woman was also a pretty darn good movie, by the
Yeah,
way.
the first
And
one.
and
Yeah.
and we'll do more. We'll do that one at some point too. But so for Man of Steel, they got Zack Snyder on board, and he kind of had this big vision of expanding the universe into a Justice League sort of thing. And they even got Christopher Nolan and David Goyer, who wrote The Dark Knight, which is practically a perfect
Fantastic
movie.
series. Yeah.
That and they got them on board to kind of develop the story and develop the movie a little bit. Of course, it's a Zack Snyder movie. Like if you watch it, it is a
Yeah.
Zack Snyder movie, and that's not always a good thing necessarily. But he's had some good movies along
Yeah.
the way. But so
I'd say
yes,
he's one of those directors you always have high hopes for, and
right.
sometimes it pays off, and sometimes you're like, "Ooh, that's not what I wanted to see."
Right. And I don't know if you've watched the Rebel Moon movies, but they're pretty poor in my opinion, writing
Yeah,
wise and
I
dialogue
started.
wise,
I started the
character
first one.
wise. The second one's better in my opinion,
Okay,
but it's definitely not great. So yeah, so when we talked about, I have a list of like 160 movies I want to eventually get through. So this is going to be years in the making. And my idea with some of these episodes, and I asked Steven to come on with me, because instead of me doing it by myself, and we were talking about getting back together and doing some stuff anyway, I thought it's always better with a conversation.
yeah,
But I had watched this one recently. I'd watched it with my kids, mostly Hosanna, but Mike and Elisha were kind of in and out watching it with us. And And of course, now as a writer, as you grow as a when you grow as a writer, you start to notice things and the choices that they made and all that sort of stuff. And with movies, more than anything, there's some exceptions, but most of the time you don't throw a movie together. And if you do,
Right.
it's a mistake, generally speaking.
Years in the making for a movie.
It's years in the making. So there are tons of decisions that have to get made before you see the final product. So that's why I like going through some of these movies, because you can see a lot of those writing choices and whether they work or not and how they work together. And, and of course, there's all sorts of things like executives that get involved and stuff too. But so anyway, so I just figured we'd go over this one since it's more recent. And I've got 3 different super lessons in from this movie.
Can I just say, I think there was a little bit missing not having a John Williams score behind this one.
Thank you.
Looking for that but it was still a good score, but it was definitely more mellow, more dark,
Yeah,
more
that's
ambient.
true.
It wasn't John Williams.
That's true. It was Zimmer, right? Though wasn't it Zimmer?
Yeah, I
Hans
mean,
Zimmer,
which is a fantastic
which
composer as well.
he's amazing, but it's just a different.
Yeah.
It's a different. Just as an aside, somebody said something the other day, and I thought it was pretty interesting. One of our friends, Paul McDonald, pointed this
Oh yeah.
out, that John Williams did like 3 movies that changed movie history. Like
Right.
literally changed movies.
Was it
Clo-
Star Wars,
clo-
Indiana Jones,
Without
and
Star Wars
uh
and Superman,
yes.
because there hadn't been like a big budget, real super hero movie that had done well
Uh-huh.
and got you to believe that somebody could fly and all that stuff. So like it popularized what was seen as like a kid's medium, right?
Right.
Star Wars, which was the sort of science fiction,
Yeah.
and to some
Space.
degree, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Like he really legitimized, like his scores really legitimized. And yeah, you could maybe put Indiana Jones in there, but like when you really think that his scores were parts of movies that really
Mhm.
changed movies,
Well,
like
and for our generation, and probably, maybe a couple of the younger generations, like they're synonymous with the movie. You hear the score and you
right,
know what movie it's from. Like they're not separated, on their own. You
right,
hear
no,
Star
yeah,
Wars music and that's a Star Wars movie. Yeah. Like
exactly.
his music personifies the
Oh,
films that he
absolutely.
worked on.
And that's one of the things we're going to focus mostly on writing
Yeah.
because this isn't an acting. We're not actors. I mean, we can comment on acting maybe, what we really want to dig into the writing because that's the kind
Yeah.
of stuff we can control. Whether we're writing a script for something or novel or something like that. And so the first thing I'm going to get into is character.
Yeah. So why did you pick this movie, Man of Steel?
Well, okay, so for me, there's a little bit of history with Superman in the sense of I didn't get into Superman early. When I was a kid, I was more into Spider-Man and Batman. It wasn't until I was probably in my early 20s that I started to get into the comic books of Superman.
Yeah.
And it was during that time where Superman died and and I started to get into some of those comics,
Oh yeah, the Doomsday arc.
the Doomsday arc and some of the other, the Return of the Superman, and there was all sorts of arcs that they had. And one of the things that as a kid, even as a kid, kind of turned me off with Superman was he was too powerful. Like he
Yeah.
was too strong. He was invincible. I mean, except for kryptonite or whatever. And so for me, it wasn't as interesting. But then when I was a little older, I found it interesting that they could tell great stories with a character who was kind of invincible.
Hmm.
Like, how do you do that? And so that's kind of why I wanted to pick Man of Steel, because it's one of those things where the writing, in order for us to really care about this movie, we have to care about different things. It can't
Hmm.
be oh well, he might die at any moment. It can't be that sort of urgency
Right.
necessarily. And so I think that they did it. I think both the original Superman with Christopher Reeve and this one, I think they did a good job. You know, because you had some good writers, Christopher Nolan and stuff like that,
Yeah.
trying to bring some of that in. So that's kind of why I picked this one to start off.
Yeah, it's interesting how what you pointed out is that they took a character and basically made him invincible, made it so there were no like stakes really high for him, but what becomes his stakes and his character development is protecting those that are weaker than him and staying on a path of what is right and moral and having to wrestle with that more so than like, oh no, my life's in danger. How am I going to survive this? And
Right.
so they,
All right. Well,
yeah, I
we're
think
gonna get to that
so.
point. We're gonna get to the
Yeah,
stakes point. But
yeah,
first let's look at
characters.
character, okay? Because so for Superman, I think they did two really interesting things in this movie to me with
Yeah.
Superman's character and with Lois's character. So we'll kind of
Oh yeah.
tackle Superman first. And so for Superman, they concentrated on questions of identity. Where do I come from? And and these 3 points that I'm going to make, hopefully we'll be able to kind of tie them all together because they all sort of go together.
Hmm.
And but for his character, it's about his identity. It's about his compassion. It's about how he shows restraint. Like he's so powerful, but he also has to learn. He has to learn how to control it. He has to learn
Yeah.
restraint, and he has to learn how to fit in with humanity somehow. There's a lot of humility going on, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he could be because they contrast him with Zod a
Hmm.
lot. You know, Zod is he doesn't say it in this movie, but in the original it was kneel before Zod or whatever. Like
Hmm.
he believes that because he has these powers, he should be able to tell everybody what to do. And you know, Clark Kent, Superman, he's kind of different in that. He's got more humility and he tries to hide himself, right?
Yeah.
There's the whole classic, you know, secret identity thing. But then even
Right.
before that, he's struggling with whether or not he can reveal who he is and what he can do.
Yeah.
And then there's a big element in his character of self-sacrifice. So they work on a lot of these elements for him
Hmm.
that I think make it really interesting for us. It's not simply because I think in the original, like when I was growing up, the '70s Super Friends, Superman,
Hmm.
he didn't have a character. It was this flat character. He was just
Yeah.
always going to do what was right, truth, justice, the American way. He was always going to be good. He was always going to do what was right. Yada 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 yada
The
yada.
Boy Scout.
The Boy Scout, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I think Spider-Man, when I was a kid, Spider-Man and even Batman were a little more interesting as they weren't invincible and they had flaws and they had struggles and yada all that and dark pasts and all this stuff.
Yeah.
You didn't really get that
With
when I was a
Superman.
kid with
Yeah.
Superman. So anyway, so I think they did a good job with that with him. What do you think?
Yeah. I think they did a really good job in this movie, particularly with showing his struggle of like hiding who he is for the safety of his family and because that was the big picture that his parents were always telling him, the Kent's parents. They were saying, you can't reveal yourself, you can't reveal your powers because it would scare everyone. Humanity wouldn't know how to take it, they'd be afraid. And so they show these situations when he's younger, like he's getting bullied and beat up by kids, and he's just having to find his own self control in that because he's still got kind of those human emotions that have been seeded in him from living on Earth. Like you can tell he wants to retaliate, or like when the bus goes into the water and all his friends are drowning, all his classmates. He has to make that choice. Do I do something now and save everyone, or
Right.
do I keep my powers hidden? And then he's faced with that same dilemma. And you talked about this as self-sacrifice, but in this scenario, in the tornado with
Right.
his earthly father, and his father felt it still wasn't time for the world to see who he was, and so he tells him, "Don't save me." He kind of puts that silent like plea out there. And so the self-sacrifice there was actually sacrificing his own father to not, show who he was as this outsider, this very powerful being. And then that, follows him into his adult life, into like when he does start stepping into the Superman role. He tells Lois Lane, he says, basically, I can't reveal who I am because everyone's fearful, and I gave up my own father. I sacrificed my own father to keep that
Right.
secret. That was my father's dying wish. And so he wrestled with that, like, I can't, you know, uh, 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 reduce the value of that sacrifice that was made from my father,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Jonathan Kent.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the other character that I thought they did something actually a little different and very interesting with was Lois Lane.
Mm-hmm.
So what they kind of set up with their characters, you have Lois Lane. So you have Superman who's trying to hide himself,
Right.
right? But then you have Lois Lane. What's Lois Lane's superpower? Is she finds hidden things.
Yes.
That's her superpower.
Investigative journalism.
She's an investigative journalist, and she finds secrets and she exposes the truth. And in this movie, they don't do the cheesy thing where if he just puts on glasses, then like she can just everybody goes, oh, we don't know it's Superman anymore, and which is
Well, they did it at the very end.
well, it kind of at the very end, but she knows she knows that Superman, she knows who it is,
Yeah.
but so she discovers who Clark Kent is. She
Right,
actually does discover, but for her character, her growth is that she's first investigating because it's going to be a big story. She's going to be popular, whatever. It's going to make her career, that sort of element. But when she realizes who he really is,
Yeah.
she helps keep his secret,
Yeah.
which is different than kind of the at least the original setup with Lois Lane and Superman. And so I really like that element to it. I thought that was a much more mature character for Lois Lane for us to look at. And anyway, so I enjoyed what they did with Lois.
Yeah, it was interesting to, like, she was willing to sacrifice her career almost to keep him protected, because she's like, oh yeah, all my leads, they fell through, but really she had met him and talked to him and figured out who he was, and then realized, oh, I need to keep his secret safe and secret for the rest of humanity's safety as
Well,
well.
yeah, and she realized like he wasn't looking for fame. He wasn't looking for attention. He wasn't
Right.
saving people to get attention. That's part of his humility and his character. He wasn't saving people so people would
Yeah.
flock to him or worship him or he'd get something out of it. He was just doing it
Yeah.
out of compassion. And so I think that drew her in a way that helped her make, certain decisions,
Yeah.
All right, so in my number two
Hmm.
is the themes. And again, I think we're going to see how a lot of these come together.
Yeah.
And because all right, coming in at number two on my super lessons to get from Man of Steel is theme. Now, themes are like love, or in this case, family is a big theme
Yeah.
in this movie. And the main themes that I got out of this was what kind of person are you going to be?
Hmm.
Because this is something that Jonathan Kent, especially, and to some degree Jor-El, they
Jor-El
try,
does too.
they try to get into his mind and in his heart. They're like, what kind of person are you going to be? Yes, you can literally destroy the world with a punch or something, but what's more important is who you are on the inside.
Yeah.
And this is something that Jonathan tries to get to him, because either way, whatever kind of person you're going to be, you're going to influence the world. You're going to get out into the world. You're going to influence the world. And and then that goes into this next theme is what do we do with the power that we have?
Hmm.
So that's a big theme because, and that goes into Lois's character. She has the power to expose him, but what is she going to do with that power? He
Yeah.
has the power to do all these amazing things. What is he going to do with that power? And of course, we said family, and that's a big contrast between Zod and Superman. Is Clark Kent had family. He has basically two fathers. He's got
Hmm.
Jor-El and he's got Jonathan. He's got a very strong
Yeah.
mother. He's got a community around him where Zod has nobody. Zod was just like, especially in this movie, he was a product of just genetic whatever.
Well, so that's, I think, another big part of this theme is what they establish through the Kryptonians, and that's why I feel did work really well with this movie. Is they set up a lot, like the almost the whole first third was about the Kryptonians. You're in space, you're seeing their technology, you're hearing about kind of their political squabbles, um, and so you're hearing about their political squabbles. And so it really grounds the movie in the fact, like, okay, we've got these people in space that are aliens and have a whole nother um, society, the way they do things. And the way they set up their society was that they genetically modify people for specific tasks. So
Right,
you're
right, right, right,
born
right.
to fulfill this task. And Zod's task was to be the protector of the kryptonite of the Krypton, and so that's his big push. Like he, like you said, he didn't really have anyone, but then again, what he had was he was bound to it. You know, he
Yeah,
had the people of Krypton that he was bound to protect and serve. And he said, even if I have to do things that are, he's a quote towards the end, like even if it's like violent and whatever, absurd, I'm gonna do what it takes to protect the line of Krypton.
yeah.
And so you get
Yeah,
this big theme of the movie is predetermined purpose versus free will, or as we Christians would
that's
say, like
true.
predestination versus free will, because you get Jor-El talking to Superman through the AI, and he says, what if a child dreamed of becoming something other than what society had intended? What if a child aspired to something greater? And so that was Jor-El's big push, was like, we need to create Kryptonians that have free will to choose what they want to do to be a better people.
Right. Yeah, yeah. No, 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 that's good. I think that's a good thing too, because not only was it kind of family versus no family,
Hmm.
like the influence of family, a mother, a father, like
Yeah.
those influences in a good way. Like people can have toxic
Right.
relationships and abusive relationships too, but in Clark Kent, what they were trying to show, like if you have a good father, you have a good mother, they're more concerned about who you are on the inside and your character
Yeah.
than what you do, and that's a pretty amazing theme. And I love that they kind of dug into some of that because but I like what you pointed out. Like it was almost, because he does say, Zod talks about his programming at some point.
Yeah.
This is my programming. I have to do my programming.
Yeah.
And, and that kind of gets into this, it might be a little controversial, but it gets into this, I was born this way. Well,
Hmm.
you still have free will. You still have the ability to develop your character. You don't have to be labeled, well, I have this issue, then it's hopeless for me, or I just have to give into this. You can grow,
Hmm.
you can change, you can develop, and that sort of thing. And so, and the other main theme that I saw, and we talked about it with his character, was solitude.
Mm.
That that great that before we can be introduced to the world and our gifts for all of us, like this
Hmm.
is a theme of Superman, that you have to develop that gift where no one sees you. That the
Right.
first discipline you have is alone.
To be
And
unique,
and I'm
basically.
trying to remember who said it. I should have looked it up. It's coming
Sure.
to me now. So, but there's a quote that says, "Discipline is what you do when no one's watching." Like
Hmm.
discipline is what you do when no one can see what you're doing, and then you have kind of the strength to be the person you need to be without performing. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so that was a big part of this movie too. Is the fortress of solitude idea
Right.
for Superman is that he
And they don't
needs
really even
time
get into
away.
that. Like
No,
it's a
not in
big
this
theme for
one.
Superman. They sort of showed where he's kind of sets up that, but yeah, a big theme for Superman in general is just that fortress of solitude. Um, and even I think the thing that's unique about Superman too that sets him apart from the other Kryptonians is that he did have almost two sets of parents. He had his
Yeah,
Kryptonian parents, and then he had his human parents, and they really instilled that morality compass in him and gave him that desire to want to protect the whole species of human. And Jonathan Kent, his earthly father, even said to him, he said, "There's a potential for every person to be a force for good." And so,
right.
like setting that morality line, kind of defining, okay, who are you going to be by your choices that you make, um, was a big driving factor of his character and his theme.
Well, and here's what a family does, and that this is what they show in this movie. Like by the if it's healthy, right? What a
Yeah,
family does is they teach you what it means to be human, and they teach you your family teaches you how to treat people with
yeah.
compassion,
How to value
how
others.
to value others. That's what a real family does. I mean, that's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah,
And so, and and all of us, we have our natural families, and we have the families that have adopted us to some degree, right? I mean, through life,
yeah,
we have friends, and that we treat as family, and
yep,
but that doesn't. It's not a one or the other. We all kind of have both of those, and healthy relationships help us to see the intrinsic value in all people. And he had to see that, because now we're getting into the third part, which you kind of already, talked about a little bit, which was the stakes for Superman.
yeah,
Because now that we've established the themes and what he learned, now the story can hone in on that and say, for Superman, the problem isn't, is he going to live?
hmm,
There's other problems that are just as important to him and to us.
yeah,
And then that's when they get into his stakes, what it means for
yeah.
him.
And same for me as it was for you when I was younger. Superman wasn't really like he wasn't top tier favorite superhero for me, but it was because I felt like he lacked stakes as being
Sure.
this invincible guy. But I felt they did a great job in this movie, kind of showing what stakes there were for him through like protecting those that you know depended on him or weaker than him. They show through the different stages. Like he kind of goes to jobs. He takes jobs until he has to save someone there, or
Right,
like
right. And then he's got to quit.
you have to move on. And then I felt like they did a great job of echoing that increasing of stakes in the end when the real conflict starts happening, and the fight kind of ends up at his parents' house first. Like they show up there and they kind of destroy the barn and they throw the truck into his mom's house and
Right,
destroys there. And then the conflict moves into Smallville itself. And
right.
there's a lot of destruction that starts happening in
Oh, that's good.
Smallville.
I see.
And
Yeah, that's
then
good.
it goes even further into the main city, into the world. And so it sort of shows like how Superman is dealing with these stakes that are family, close to home, very small.
Good. That's
And then it
good.
starts getting bigger to like, oh, his hometown. And now it's the city. And now it's the world. The world is the stakes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I
These are
thought they
these are
did a
the
great
things that
job
he
with it.
care about. These are the
Yeah.
things he cares about.
Yeah.
And 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 so fighting these people while at the same time protecting them,
Yeah.
fighting the bad guys, Zod, while at the same time protecting, puts him at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
And they say that at one point. I forget her name, but the female says that's your morality is your weakness or whatever, which is
Yes.
a trope in a lot of these stories. Oh, your morality is your weakness, your compassion,
Mm.
your love. Because nobody believes that really.
Right.
And they put that, they have bad guys say that, but I'm like, do they really? They don't really believe that. But anyway, but it does put him at a disadvantage, because they make it really clear that Zod would just kill every human because they're just bugs to him. They're just less
Yeah.
than and all that. And so the stakes, so that's one of the stakes. I think the other main stake that they kind of put in this movie, and again, it goes through the themes and it goes through his character. It's all interconnected. Is he doesn't want to be Zod.
Yes.
Like that's like now he has a very clear contrast of who he could be. Like
Hmm.
Zod never tries to hide. Zod
Right.
introduces himself right away and tries to expose Superman. Like
Yeah.
he's all about exposing everything and abusing his power and all of that. And then you have that moral dilemma at the end
Hmm.
where, you know, Superman has to choose, do I kill? So now his morality, his
Yeah.
compassion, his character is put to the test where he's put in an impossible choice. It kind
Yeah.
of falls flat a little bit to me,
A little
writing
bit of that
wise,
scene. Yeah.
just for a couple of different reasons, which we can get into. But writing wise, that's a good thing to try to do. Put your character in a situation where it doesn't matter what they choose, they lose.
Hmm.
And that and so that's so even if it's
That's
not about his life and death,
yeah.
like he's still going to lose either way. He's going to become a killer, which he doesn't want to be, or
Yeah.
he's going to become a killer letting Zod, you know, either way,
Yeah.
he's going to become a killer.
And
And
those
that
kind
was
of
an
stakes
interesting,
is what get readers and watchers, viewers engaged. Like
right,
that's what gets them to be like, what would I do? You know, putting themselves in the shoes of the hero, or even like it gets them cheering one way or the other, like do the thing. Like there was a scene earlier on where they talked about the juxtaposition of the atmospheres and how Superman wasn't really adjusted to the Kryptonian
oh,
atmosphere,
right,
and
right,
then
right, right,
the Kryptons, when they were breathing in our atmosphere, they were starting to go through all the pains of what Superman went through as a child. And there was a part where Superman had basically punched off Zod's mask, and Zod's, he's going through all this overexposure of his senses. And I'm like, okay, Superman, this is where you blast him with your laser vision right in the head. He doesn't have his mask on. He's disoriented. Like this is when you do it, and he doesn't do it. And I'm like, why didn't he just? But it's because he still hadn't chosen. He had not willingly chosen to cross that line of I'm going to kill people or I'm going to take people's lives. I feel like I can still solve this without crossing that line. And so then later on, they kind of bring that back with being in a scenario where he's either forced to kill the guy that's trying to kill a family of people, humans nonetheless, not even people that are connected to Clark himself,
right.
to Superman. And so it's that very raw, a pure like I have to do something now, or innocents are going to perish because of my inability to act.
Yeah,
And yeah,
it's a great device to put your because I think a lot of times as writers we want to put our characters in life and death situations for them.
right.
But like if you're telling if you're writing a book like I do a lot of times in first person, you can't do that, right? Like this person is telling the story, so obviously they lived,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Like it just
Yeah.
doesn't logically make sense that they would be in a life or death. Like you're like, oh well, they're obviously going to survive. But if you make the characters care about something
Hmm.
or someone to such a degree that putting that in danger or put them in these sort of impossible moral choices,
Yeah.
those are real stakes because I think we all feel that sometimes, maybe not to that extreme. And I think it's
Hmm.
important. You kind of pointed it out. And I didn't think about it that it kind of goes. It does go into the theme of family, his choice, because it's a family. It's not just a person. It's a mom and a
Hmm.
dad and a
Couple
kid, and
kids.
it's
Yeah.
like there's a family involved. Again, I think it didn't hit as much as I would have wanted it to for a couple of different
Yeah.
reasons. Like like he was hitting him pretty hard, like
Right. And then
knocking
all
knocking
of a
down.
sudden he can just
Now he can just snap the
snap
guy's
his neck.
neck. Like
Yeah.
that's possible for him now. Like I don't see like if he was that much stronger, then
Right.
where was that?
It didn't seem to line up in the power struggle where they were at.
It didn't seem to line up.
Yeah.
And you know our mutual friend Carla Hoke, who has been on this YouTube channel,
Hmm.
you know uh, we went over District 9 or whatever that movie was.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
But you know she's told me, you know, so she's like a black
Black
belt
Bart.
in jujitsu or something. And so she knows a lot about fighting, and and putting realistic fighting, and she's got a whole book on it. I highly recommend it. And Fight Right,
Hmm.
WRIT, Fight Right. And it was a great book. But she talks about, like, do you know how hard it is to snap someone's neck and kill them that way? Like
Hmm.
that's an incredibly difficult thing just for two humans to do, for one human to do to another, because like people would be dying all the time from like
Right.
turning their
Just getting
head
your
too
neck.
fast or
No, no.
something. Like
Yeah.
but like we see it in movies all the time. So there was just a couple of those things that kind of fell a little flat to me.
Yeah.
But I do think in general that moral choice is something that we can learn
Mhm.
from. And so anyway, so those are my stakes. You got any other thoughts as we
Yeah,
kind of
so I
close down?
I was thinking, you bring it up, the fact that that scene fell flat to me. That wasn't that didn't pop out to me as the climax either. I think because of that, to me, I feel like the climax of the movie was right after the fight in Smallville, when he's having to like fight three of them and sort of protect the soldiers at the same time. But it was in this fight where the soldiers were still, they were considering him to be a threat and firing on him and everything. And so there's a point at the end where he ends up like catching one of them out of a helicopter and then saving a couple more, and they fly off because they're like injured. The Kryptonians do, they fly off, and so it's just Superman and the soldiers left, and they all have their guns trained on him, drawn down, and he just stands there and kind of, he's like, like pretty much showing that he surrenders. He's not going to fight them, and the colonel comes up and says, "This man is not our enemy," and he's like, "Thank you, Colonel." And I felt like that was kind of one of the climaxes, maybe not the climax, but that I remember thinking like that was a well written scene to kind of show that, like,
Right.
okay, they're now beginning to understand who he is, and what he's standing for, and that he's not
Right.
also, a target, or an enemy combatant.
And they one of the last scenes was is with the general or colonel or
Yeah,
whoever he
yeah.
is, where it's like, look, man, if I wanted to hurt people, I would.
He's like, I've been
You
here
know,
for 30 years.
yeah, like this is, you know, I'm American, and you know, I
Yeah.
was raised in Kansas. Like this is my home, and you don't have to worry about me. And so I think overall it was a good origin story, and I'm with you. It had a lot of promise. I like I said, I have a there are a couple story issues I have with it. I don't think they explain very well why Jor-El and Laura couldn't leave with him. Like
Right.
if Jor-El designed these scout ships that are all over the universe,
Right.
why could they only build a ship just big enough for the baby? Oh, you just have to trust me. This
Right.
is
Because it
I'm
seemed
like,
like there was a bit of a passing of time after they shot off,
yeah,
Clark
and
Kent.
I'm like again, like I think they could have done that better. I think they could have explained it better, or set
Hmm.
it up in a different way. But like I
I remember
said,
having that same thought too. Like, wait, so why can't they
yeah,
also
yeah,
take themselves
right.
out?
Oh, you just have to trust us. That I'm like,
Yeah.
no, no, that, that's not how this works. Like, you got to
Right.
give me a better reason than that. And you know, story reasons. Like that's what my kids say. Like when something like that
Yeah.
happens, they're like story reasons.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, but despite some of those things,
Yep.
I think it's a very well done movie. I loved the concentration on character that we talked about, some of the different things that they did, and I think it's got some really good lessons for us as writers as we kind of look at our own stories. So speaking of that, I wanted to get into that just a little bit. What have you been working on?
So I've got this, unending project. I have a lifelong project of my sci-fi series that I've been working on, which is always, I love getting into that story and getting back to it and working through things, but then I have to take breaks from it to do other things. So I've been working on a lot of D&D type
Yeah.
things, like
Uh-huh. Yep.
role playing, getting into like telling stories together with others and sort of putting together the characters, the settings, the scenes, and all that. So that's been a fun passion project for me for the past couple of years is really understanding that whole system and how to develop stories with that and having fun telling stories through that medium with friends and family. And then, of course, I've got a couple other projects that I work on from time to time for the podcast, trying to finish up. We've got a really good story that we worked on, and then life happens, and
Oh
there's
yeah,
a
yeah.
break in it, and so working on that kind of pirate navigation one,
Mm-hmm.
Andromeda Voyage. So that's been the other one that I've been wrapping my head around to pick back up and get done with that. I just watched this really good show called Shogun,
Oh
and
yeah, I haven't finished it yet, but
they talked a lot about kind of how that naval warfare was going on at the time, and it got me thinking more in
yeah,
that
yeah.
vein again.
Yeah, good call.
But yeah, I just finished that this week, and it was good. It's
Oh, it was excellent. I mean, I
yeah,
haven't finished the last episode, but I mean, it's
yeah, it didn't end exactly how I think maybe as the viewers we're looking for or hoping for. But it was an excellent story. But I mentioned it just because it had a lot of that
yeah,
talk
yeah,
about
yeah,
naval
yeah, yeah.
battle and how that was like the the strong force at the time. Like if you had a ship with all these cannons, you could just go and take over a city,
Oh,
even if it was
sure.
a city of warriors. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I've really been enjoying that. Because, so, of course, I'm old enough to remember the original
Yeah.
miniseries of Shogun in the 80s. I mean, I was
Yeah.
young, but I remember it with Richard Chamberlain and it was on TV. It
Yeah.
was a
So
huge book in the 70s. I
I
haven't
was
read the
watching
book.
it through with my brother-in-law, and then we would go back after episodes and we would watch a couple like side-by-side scenes from YouTube videos where they show like
Oh,
the
I
original,
should
and
look up
then
those videos. I should
yeah,
look up those videos. That
it's
would
a
be really
much
fun.
different. Yeah, it's weird, or it's interesting the way the mood is
Oh, yeah, yeah,
very
yeah, yeah.
different between the
Oh,
two,
no,
but
yeah.
it's basically the same material.
Yeah, sure.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. It's so, yeah. So, for everyone watching, please remember to like and follow and share. If you have any comments on Man of Steel, any comments on anything that we talked about, put it in the comments. If you want to say
yeah.
anything, put it in the
We want to hear
comments
what you
there.
guys think.
We want to hear what you think about Man of Steel and some of the writing choices that Nolan and Zack Snyder and everything that they did. And we're going to be back for more. So
Yeah.
Steven's going to choose the movie next time.
Yes. Thank you for
And
having me on this time. I
oh no,
appreciate.
it'll be good.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun to do some more of these. So it'll be good. All right. So
Looking forward to it.
peace out, everybody.